So the Druid is possibly the worst and the best class right now in Diablo 4. Well, maybe not the worst, I think that title goes to the Sorcerer, but it's definitely a divisive class. On one hand, I absolutely hated this during the leveling stages, but on the other hand, I'm just loving it right now in the end game, especially since I got a chance to get a bunch of drops that enabled possibly one of the best builds right now in the entire game. So much so that it just trivializes many of the aspects that I had a lot of trouble with some of the other builds, and I believe there's a unique perspective this class can offer compared to all others, especially if you haven't played with it until now. So this is how my Druid looks right now. Yes, I know, far from perfect and still requires better items, maybe more lucky hit chance and critical strike and so on. But even at this stage, it behaves so well. I'm able to go into a middle of a pack of enemies, pop in that dire werewolf form with the Grizzly Rage, and then completely unleash a huge amount of tornadoes that just blast through anything. Not only do they deal more damage, they also reduce my cooldowns, they slow enemies, and even more so, they completely generate a lot more spirit for me so that I can spam even more of them. And not only that, I have so many defenses via Cyclone Armor and Hurricane and the Blood Howl. I'm able to generate so much Fortify and completely stay at full HP no matter what. You can literally go into the middle of a pack of 20 plus level elites over your character level and face tank anything like it's no tomorrow. I don't think I've played with any other class that's able to face tank things so easily like the Druid, especially with this build. Now, of course, things might change later on at maybe Nightmare Dungeon level 50 or 75 or getting closer to 100. But I will tell you this is probably the most noob-friendly build right now in all Diablo 4. I'm not going to lie, this build is heavily reliant on two very specific drops, which I guess is one of the main reasons why I still kinda hate this class. One of them is the Tempest Roar unique helmet, and the other one is the Dire Wolf legendary aspect. Without these two right here, you cannot make this setup work, so make sure you get them first. But I was lucky enough and got the Tempest Roar at around level 60, so that was a huge stroke of luck right there. This already enables half of this build and gives us two very important powers. One of them is the lucky hit chance, so that storm skills have up to 25% chance to grant us 4 spirit. Spirit generation with this build is very important. We need a lot of resources to spam our attacks, especially tornado, and this helps a ton with that. But the second one is even more important because it turns our base storm skills, so yes, this includes tornado too, to now become werewolf skills. This means since we're gonna be constantly in the werewolf form, we will benefit from the extra damage that it deals, extra crit chance, and also extra ways to generate even more, you guessed it, spirit on top. The other one is the Dire Wolf legendary aspect. This is going to turn Grizzly Rage to now shapeshift us into a Dire Werewolf instead of the Werebear. So as we pop the Grizzly Rage, not only do we benefit from the extra damage and the extra damage reduction and even the Fortify with the upgraded version, but also these other two benefits on top, or 3 actually. We have the movement speed to let us more easily breeze through dungeon, even more damage reduction, and the most important, more spirit cost reduction so that we can spam our tornado a lot more often. So once we pop the Grizzly Rage, we enter that form and we can also cast the Tornado, which we cannot if we don't have this Dire Wolf. So that's why this is so important to get. Everything from this point on is just the cherry on top, so Rampaging War Beast gives us more critical strike damage and slightly increases the duration of Grizzly Rage, which is always going to be helpful. We also get the Retaliation aspect, which makes our core skills to deal much higher damage based on the amount of Fortify that we get. And between the attacks that we deal and also the Blood Howl with its upgrades, we will constantly be at or close to max Fortify all the time, no matter what, so we constantly benefit from this too. Also, Storm Chaser is very important because it makes the pathing of the tornadoes a lot better, since now they actively seek additional targets, up to 3 if you can get the perfect roll. I only got it with 1 additional target, but even so, it does make a difference. For the remaining 2 damage aspects, it depends on which of the capstone passives you gone with, either Earthen Might or the Perfect Storm. So in that case, you can either choose between the Night Hauler if you went with the Storm, or the Mighty Storm if you went with the Earthen Might. We're going to discuss these in a little bit once we go over the skill tree. Speaking of the skill tree, this is how it looks. If you want to go ahead and copy this down or follow the build guide down below, you can just go ahead and do so. But in terms of the starting skill, of course, Storm Strike is going to be important. We use it on a skill bar because this is going to be like one of the main ways to generate spirit when we cannot from other sources. Maybe cooldowns are on and so on. So this helps a bit in that downtime. You can of course go with the Fierce Storm Strike upgrade if you want like better vulnerable apply, but I thought that just having tornadoes was plenty enough for me, so in this case I sacrificed that point. And speaking of the tornado, this is the core skill that we use, the main damage dealer, and with the upgrade it has a 20% chance to spawn an additional tornado every time you cast this, so you will see a ton of them happening on the screen. Also, this is why I said that I didn't go with the upgrade for the Storm Strike. I went with the Raging Tornado, which itself has a chance to already apply vulnerable for 3 seconds every time it hits enemies. And it hits them continuously, so I found that it has a very good uptime on that debuff. Outside of that, Heart of the Wild increase our spirits, and Wild Impulses here increases the core skill cost, but also increases the damage they deal by 15%. So that is very good, even though we do get a slight downside. Outside of this, the passives here are Predatory Instinct for additional critical strike chance, and the Digitigrade Gate gives us more movement speed while in werewolf form, which we are almost constantly, and we also get it for 3 seconds after leaving that form. So all in all, this is one of the fastest moving builds in the entire game. Now, for some of the defensives, we have the Cyclone Armor. This has both an active and a passive component. So passively, this already gives you a almost 14% non-physical damage reduction. But if you activate this, this is going to expand the winds, knock back enemies, also deal some damage. But with the first upgrade, it already slows them down by 70%. So if you want like damage against, in this case, CC'd enemies, it can help with that. The most important, preserving Cyclone Armor. Every 10 seconds, it intensifies, causing incoming damage to grant you 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds. Another important one is the Blood Howl. This heals us for 20% of our maximum HP, and also has a very good cooldown reduction on the enhanced version. Every time we defeat an enemy, the cooldown of it is reduced by 1 second. So realistically, yeah, the uptime on this is very, very high. And finally, the Preserving upgrade. Blood Howl also increases attack speed by 15%. Attack speed is actually really a good stat on this setup. We also have a passive here called Vigilance. This just gives us more damage reduction after using a defensive skill. So assuming you cast a Cyclone Armor, this is going to also benefit it, and yeah, just gives us more damage reduction on top. From here, we jump straight into the Hurricane, another great defensive ability with the 2 upgrades right here up to the Savage Hurricane. So the first one, the advanced version, this is going to slow down enemies by 25% when we have Hurricane active. The second one is going to reduce their damage by 20%. Furthermore, these 2 passives right here help a lot Storm skills in general, as well as the Hurricane. So Elemental Exposure is going to further increase the chance to make enemies vulnerable with Storm skills. So this is going to include that Tornado too, which already applies vulnerable with one of its upgrades. And Endless Tempest just increases the duration of Hurricane by another 15%. These other 3 passives right here are also very important, specifically the Toxic Claws, which makes critical strikes with werewolf skills to deal 8% of their base damage as poisoning damage. And do you remember how the Tempest Roar Helmet already makes our Storm skills to also become werewolf skills? Well, our tornadoes as such also poison enemies, so we benefit from this too, which is going to synergize with the other 2 passives here, including Neurotoxin, which just slows poisoned enemies by 8%, and the Envenom, which is going to make poisoned enemies to take 30% additional critical strike damage. In the ultimate category, obviously the Grizzly Rage is the most important, and with that legendary aspect, we are able to transform into the Dire Werewolf, which in this case gives all those benefits: damage increase, damage reduction, movement speed, cost reduction for our abilities, and pretty much everything else on top. Also, with the Advanced Orwell Prime upgrade, we become unstoppable, so completely immune to CC. And finally, we gain base damage, or base life as Fortify for for every second inside of the Grizzly Rage. That's why I said that as we constantly stay inside of this, we get a ton of that and we're able to constantly pop this off in battle. Outside of this, we also went with Defiance, which makes nature magic skills to deal 12% increased damage to elites. And yes, that Hurricane also qualifies as nature magic attacks. And outside of that, defensive posture to increase the amount of fortify that we get, and also nature's resolve, which helps a bit more with the fortify when we get hit. Now, in terms of the capstone passives, you can have two options. If you're early on, you can go with the Perfect Storm. This is a bit more consistent and it still generates very good spirit and also deals increased damage with your storm skills against enemies that are vulnerable or slowed, which you always are going to make them. So with all your abilities, this is going to benefit that quite a bit. However, if you are in the end game and want to truly maximize your damage and get a ton of crits and guaranteed crits and so on, Earth and Might is going to be the best option eventually, but only if you get lucky hit chance, and I mean a lot of that, so that you can proc this Earth and Might. So if you get either the one or the other, this is also going to change, as I've said, the two legendary aspects that you will apply on your gear. So if you go with the Perfect Storm, in this case, we'll go with the Night Hauler's aspect, which is going to make your Blood Howl to provide you some extra critical strike chance. However, if you go with the Earth and Might, you will go with the Mighty Storms aspect, which is going to make the Earth and Might key passive to also apply to storm skills, in this case also to your Tornado. So it will also benefit from the fact that it can completely restore all your spirit or cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strike for 5 seconds. Anyway, let's talk about the Spirit Boons and eventually the Paragon points too. Now, not much to talk about spirits here, except maybe the Snake one, which gives it the most significant changes. But otherwise, for the Deer, we went with the damage reduction. For the Eagle, for the increased attack speed. Wolf Spirit, we get Calamity for duration for the ultimate skill. But Snake Spirit, which we also chose to be our spirit so that we can get the 2 boons here, is the most important. Specifically because we get Calm Before the Storm, the most important here, which makes nature damage skills to have up to 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. So this is another lucky hit chance skill, that's why you need quite a lot of it with this build. But since our Hurricane counts as nature magic and we constantly spam that, this reduces the cooldown of our Grizzly Rage so fast. In fact, it's so great that it literally reduces the cooldown of the Grizzly Rage while inside of the Grizzly Rage. So once that's over, you can literally jump into another one no more than a few seconds later. Like, the uptime on this is very high just because of the Snake Spirit. And as I've said, also bonding with it gives you access to a second one, so you can go with the Masochist, which gives you a lot more heal, especially since you're constantly shapeshifting and using skills in the shapeshifting form. But let's also talk about the Paragon Board. Of course, this is just level 76, so obviously it's going to change quite a bit as you level up to 100. But every single build online will suggest to put Vulnerable on the first Paragon Board right here. This is going to help you with more vulnerable damage, but also to make enemies vulnerable as you damage them. So between this, the other 2 passives, and the upgrade for the Tornado, you can easily spread that to all enemies. The first Paragon Board that we unlock after this is going to be the Ancestral Guidance, and if you go with the Legendary Node here, after spending 75 Spirit, you will deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds afterwards, which, trust me, you will actually burn through Spirit very fast, but you're still going to generate even more of it, so you will benefit from this quite often. And from this point on, you just get a lot of maximum spirits on defeating enemies, and core skill damage here from all of these rare nodes, all the way up to the Glyph, which in this case we went with the Werewolf. So this is the second most important. It just increases the damage while inside of that form. Plus, it gives us a nice additional damage reduction while inside of that form. There's also another core, well, couple of core skill damage bonuses over here from these 2 rare nodes. The third one is the Lust for Carnage. If you go with the legendary node here, it makes your critical strikes with werewolf skills to also restore to spirit. So this is going to also benefit from that unique helmet, as I've said, since your Tornado also counts as a werewolf skill now. Plus, we also went with this glyph, the Undaunted, increases the damage while fortified actually a really great one. We're constantly fortified, so it helps us with that. Plus, it provides additional damage reduction while we have Fortify on. And there are a bunch of rare nodes right here that help us quite a bit with additional werewolf skill damage and even more attack speed and maximum spirit. Other great glyphs that work really well are Spirit. This increases critical strike damage with your core skills, so something that you might consider earlier if you don't want that exploit one. Also, the Undaunted, as I've said, this increases the damage while fortified. And there's also the Earth and Sky, which increases the damage of the nature magic against enemies that are crowd controlled or vulnerable. As far as the other Paragon boards, Thunderstruck helps a ton here. You can go with the legendary node in there, which also increases the critical strike damage of the storm skills by 30% against vulnerable targets, so further playing off that. Plus the heightened malice, if you pick that legendary node, if there's at least 3 or more poisoned enemies nearby, we can deal 45% increased damage. So with the abundance of the storm attacks, you're going to have a lot of those active all the time. And this is pretty much it with the build and how the setup works. Now, as I've said, this is probably the most noob-friendly build I played with. But what I mean by that is not how you build the character itself, but actually how it plays. So it's super easy because you don't have to worry as much about dying or anything. You just go in the middle of a large pack, unleash your attacks, and generally speaking, will have a much better time surviving compared to almost anything else. Your damage is going to be up to par as well. It's one of the highest in there and also possibly one of the best AoE because everything just gets destroyed by the tornadoes and the multipliers that you get from each of these mechanics. Just remember that your tornado now isn't just like a storm skill, but also a nature and a werewolf skill with this entire build. In terms of the downsides, obviously the biggest is the fact that it's heavily reliant on 2 very specific items. So if you lack either of those, unfortunately you cannot make this build work. And even more so, to truly maximize its damage and make it as powerful as it can be, you will also need some perfect rolls on some of the gear pieces, and specifically to rely on lucky hit chance so that you can benefit from that capstone passive